Good morning on this Sunday, July 23rd, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. The city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia joined forces against the opponents of the Atlanta Police Training Facility, saying any possible referendum on the issue would be invalid. Also, plans to annex parts of DeKalb County, including Toco Hills, into the city of Brookhaven are on hold for now. And the AJC responds to UGA's Athletic Association, which called for the retraction of a story about its handling of sex abuse allegations involving some football players and recruits. Melita, Phil, and Martha are all here. Alicia Thomas-Searcy is in for Theron. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Attorneys for the city of Atlanta say an ongoing petition drive to halt the construction of a public safety training center is, quote, invalid. They made that argument in a federal court filing Monday, and Georgia's attorney general agreed. For the past month, opponents have been trying to gather the signatures of more than 70,000 registered Atlanta voters by August 15th to force a referendum. But lawyers for the city argue the massive canvassing effort has come too late. They say the authorization the city obtained 2 years ago to sign the lease agreement cannot be revoked now. Phil, this one came as quite a surprise to a lot of the opponents.
Yeah, I wish we'd kind of known this earlier, and I'm glad the Attorney General weighed in too. You just can't break this contract on a proposed amendment. And the second part of this story, of course, is I think the petition drive has gotten just started too late. And with this summer heat, how would you like to be out there trying to get signatures? They're not getting a lot of signatures.
Melita, legally, does the city and the state now, do they have a case?
I'm not sure that they do, but by stating that they have a case, they put a damper of sorts on the efforts to gather these signatures, and they are getting the headlines they wanted. Only a judge will decide whether it's legal or not. And actually, this is not the time for that determination. And so the city and the state are getting the headlines that opponents to the police training facility say will dampen their efforts to get signatures. But they're going full steam, and they're very well funded.
Well, Martha, you know, this was a comparison to that spaceport project down on the coast. The difference there was that they got the referendum in the beginning of the process and not after the fact.
Right, and I say hooray to this, okay? You know, I've said this many times. This was an answer to the 2020 riots. More police training is what we need. There was a police training center there. They've gone through the process. They voted. There's been an election in between, and people have voted again. It's time to move on.
Alicia.
Again, I appreciate the fact that these activists are, using every legal and safe option they have to try to stop this center, and I don't think it's going to happen. I think the two issues here are whether or not they can collect signatures within 4 miles, people who live 4 miles within this center. And then the other issue is whether or not they can actually do a referendum. And according to Chris Carr, the Attorney General, it has to be based on the city charter. That's the only issue that you can do a referendum. So I think they're running out of options.
Melita?
Well, I think it is interesting that in the state filing, under the direction of Attorney General Chris Carr, there was a factual error saying that all the members who voted in favor of the original contract were reelected, when in fact 2 were not.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on. Numerous mistakes were made in the audit of the 2020 general election in Fulton County, according to a consent order approved by the state election board. However, officials said that those mistakes don't change the outcome of the audit. Now, the AJC reports the errors identified by investigators amounted to about 3,000 too many absentee votes counted for Biden. Martha, is this going to sit well with those election deniers? I mean, you're talking about 3,000.
Nothing
votes.
Sits well, okay, with election deniers.
Does this give them more ammunition, though?
I think it probably will, but it won't amount to anything, because it still doesn't change the outcome of what the ultimate thing is, even if it turns out there were 3,000 more votes added in. I just don't think it's going to go anywhere. But that group of people, and we're going to be talking to some of them next week on my program, they're just not giving up, and they're going to continue to fight this fight. I just think being forward-looking, this is a theme for me today, being forward-looking instead of backward-looking is the better way to go.
Well, Alicia, state investigators blamed human error for the mistakes in a system that relied on counting paper ballots, right? Does this bring cause for concern for those that want to throw out all of those electronic voting machines and go to paper ballots? And Phil, I'll get to you on this because I know you're for that.
No, it does not, I hope. I agree with Martha that I think no matter what you say, election deniers are going to say there's a problem, but it did not change the ultimate result. All of us have run some type of organization, and you know when you do an audit, it's all about finding mistakes, human error, let's find efficiencies in processes, and so that's what this audit did. It pointed out some human error. So now Fulton County knows that they need to do more training, so do the other boards of elections. So let's do the training. This is a county that Biden won 70-something%. I don't think a couple of human errors is going to change any of the results. So let's move on.
Phil.
Well, we can't move on if there's questions like this. Misallocated ballots and double counting, that's outrageous. And what else has happened? Now remember, it goes through the software first, and then they're trying to match it when they're counting by hand. So you should be questioning the software, as we have been doing on this program recently, because no system is perfect. But I would say that when you've got 29-30 national cybersecurity experts saying that our Dominion system is going to be susceptible to hacking and manipulation, I think it's perfectly fine whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and it's kind of a bipartisan question here. Let's look at the software.
Melita, weighing here from the election deniers to the paper ballots, a lot of issues to.
Well, there are a lot of issues, but even though you used a figure of 3,000, there were really only a net of 345 additional votes for Trump. So 345 additional net votes for Donald Trump out of the hundreds of thousands cast in Fulton County really is a very small percentage.
Well, in the paper ballot argument, I know and I hear it and I deal with folks on both sides that think about that, but the paper ballots are the easiest to compromise. You get into a room with a bunch of paper ballots, you can do it.
No, I disagree with that. I don't know where you get that.
Here, the paper ballots, instead of casting the ballot.
I'm not talking about the ones we're using now. I'm talking about
in the future. If you eliminate the machines, you would mark a paper ballot and the voter would feed it into a scanner before leaving the polling place. So there's not this wide room for error of people sitting in a room counting ballots.
Right.
The ballots.
So what's the difference? You punch a
they do
machine
that now.
You mark
still do
the
that.
ballot
and then you
instead
feed
of
it
on
into
a
a
machine.
But you
scanner.
can't. You don't know what your QR code says on that. That's what bothers me. You might trust all these people. I don't trust a lot of these people.
So you trust more humans for more human error?
You know what? You're going to have human error no matter what system.
Right.
But I think which is worse, the manipulation through algorithms of software and hacking? You laugh at that, but it happens.
But the issue here is the scanner. You're still feeding it through a scanner, and
yes, but you haven't used a machine to mark the ballot. You have used a Sharpie. And
but
that
eliminates. You get a printout of who you voted for, and you look at it, and you check it, and then you feed it into the scanner.
But you don't know whether the machine you've marked accurately gives, because the scanner reads the QR code the way it is now. The scanner would read the hand-marked paper ballot. So there is no real check for whether that machine accurately reflected who is printed out as what you voted for in the QR code that none of us can read.
Wow,
yeah,
Melita and Phil agreeing.
I know. Again, it's a good show.
Because we're right.
Because all the human error, and somebody's not filling in the bubble halfway and the full way, and so I just
been there, done that, right?
It's easier to audit paper
remember
ballots.
Florida? Yes. All right. Up next, the feds may beat Fulton County in announcing yet another possible indictment against former President Donald Trump.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
The Georgia Supreme Court has unanimously ruled that lawyers for former President Donald Trump have not been able to prove a reason for them to quash the grand jury investigation into whether he and his allies should be criminally charged for illegally meddling in the 2020 election. This, as the former president said, he's been notified he's the target of yet another federal investigation, this time into the events that led to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Phil, we'll start with you.
Well, you know, I always like to quote Democrat attorneys that say that this is a witch hunt and it's a very weak case by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. And I always think that when the jury pool comes, it's all over Fulton County. You've got smart people. All it takes is just one juror. And so I think the Trump people are probably hoping, oh, there's going to be a hung jury, because the lawyers have said, let's go back to that special grand jury, which was all screwed up, and you had the foreman babbling to the media and all of that. That tainted this grand jury that's going to come forward. So I think that the president has a shot of getting a hung jury.
Alicia, weigh in here, because every time there's an indictment, the former president goes up in the GOP primary polls, but not maybe necessarily the general election polls.
Yeah, thank you for this. So let's go with the facts, right? First of all, there are 37 counts that he's been indicted on for mishandling sensitive records and essentially obstructing authorities from being able to recover them. 34 counts for falsifying business records for, you know, paying off the porn star. So now he's still under investigation and possibly going to be indicted in Georgia for his part in the fake elector scheme and trying to pressure our Secretary of State to find those 12,000 votes. Oh, and then wait, he's still probably going to be indicted for his role in the January 6th insurrection, where 5 people died that day. And so it's kind of disgusting, actually, that this ex-president raises more money every time there's talk or there's a new indictment. And so we've got to get to a point in this country where we hold everyone accountable, including Mr. Gaslight in Chief. It's time for him to be held accountable, get whatever consequences are due to him, and go away. And what's wrong with Republicans for continuing to support him, I will never understand.
Martha.
Well, I agree that President Trump should be accountable, as should President Biden be accountable for the things that he's done. You know, I do think the New York case is going to turn out to be nothing. I mean, it just really doesn't have anything behind it. You're right. As he gets indicted, people think it's more popular, but not a vote has been cast yet. We've got a lot of time to go. We've got a lot of good candidates on the Republican side. So we'll just have to see how this all plays out.
Melita, let's stay on the same topic, because attorneys for former GOP Chair David Schaefer are trying to convince Fulton County DA Fani Willis that their client should not be criminally charged because he was within his constitutional rights when he cast an alternate electoral college ballot for former President Donald Trump.
Well, of course, they're going to try to get out in front of the expected indictments by Fani Willis, and it's their job to try and make such assertions. And they did this on the same day that the fake electors in another state were indicted and charged, Michigan. So, you know, the thing about the Georgia case that we need to remember is that Trump could be pardoned on federal charges by another Republican president or by himself. But if he is convicted on Georgia state charges in a state court, he could not be pardoned by a Republican governor. He would have to be pardoned by a state pardons board. And so that's why this parallel track between federal and state indictments is so important, according to many legal experts.
All right, got to move on. A proposal to annex portions of unincorporated DeKalb County into the city of Brookhaven is on hold for now. The leader of the group pushing for a split withdrew the annexation application after some residents claimed that their signatures were forged. Melita, back to you.
Well, this has been a very troubled process. And I think the people who want to annex are just going to go back to square one, because there have been so many allegations about forged signatures and also disagreements about whether they collected enough signatures from the right places.
Martha.
Yeah, I think they'll come back to the table, and I think they'll ultimately be successful. I loved this story because I grew up in that area, and Toco Hills was like the center of the universe when I was a teenager. So seeing this happening, I think, is important, and it shows that it's still a very viable and important area because of the commercial tax base that it would bring into Brookhaven. I mean, that's really what a lot of people are talking about and what they're concerned about. But I think it's going to ultimately happen, and they'll just go back to the drawing board.
Phil?
Well, just a footnote to this too. We're talking about forged signatures and all of this.
I knew you were going there.
I know you knew I was going there, but it's going to be tough for the city clerk to be reviewing all of this when it comes to the police facility referendum.
Alicia, final word.
that whole thing felt really messy to me, right? It's like they're trying to strong-arm DeKalb County into getting involved in this issue. Then there's forged signatures. They never did meet the 60% threshold. I'm glad they've rescinded it, start over, bring everybody to the table, do this the right way.
All right. Coming up, corrections, but not a retraction of a story by the AJC involving UGA's handling of sexual abuse allegations against its football players and recruits.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
In a statement this week, the AJC said it terminated investigative reporter Alan Judd for violating the organization's journalistic standards after his reporting on how the University of Georgia's football program handled sex abuse allegations against its players and recruits. The attorney for the athletic program demanded a retraction of the entire story. Instead, the AJC issued corrections in 2 areas of the investigation. Phil, to you first. The fact that they terminated reporter Alan Judd shows that this was a really serious matter.
Well, it is serious, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has been thoroughly humiliated with this incident. I'll give you a quick example of what Judd did in one of his stories. He said that there are 11 cases where the University of Georgia Athletic Association rallied to protect these players with the sexual assault allegations, but the editor found out later, and it was exposed by the Athletic Association's attorney, there were no such 11 cases. It was made up out of thin air. I could give other examples. And last week I pointed out that there was a 9-page letter from the Athletic Association attorney that listed chapter and verse of where there were misinformation, there were half-truths, quotes made up. It should have been a retraction. It was a very weak correction that was printed the other day in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A judge should have been fired. He was a disgrace to journalism. You know, journalism is in bad repute already, and this didn't help matters.
Melita, should there have been a full retraction?
Well, if the lawyers, the media lawyers for the AJC felt a full retraction were necessary, I'm sure there would have been. The majority of that story stood. And so Judd has had a long and distinguished career, and I'm sorry to see that this became necessary over that particular story. But firing Judd doesn't mean that all journalists are going to pull away from investigating the athletic department at the University of Georgia, nor does it mean that the department is free to continue to not police their players and have consequences for bad behavior.
I don't know. I mean, for all of us who've worked in newsrooms, the editors, the publishers, the news directors get a little spooked when things like this happen. And I don't know if the watchdog media will be as hard and be as investigative.
Well, look, Judd should have been fired. He had a history from a previous job before he was with the AJC where he was fired for something similar. It was 25 years ago. You didn't have Google. It was probably easier to move and change jobs and not have that found out. But also his colleagues off the record have said they didn't like to work with him because he did this consistently, this kind of making things up out of whole cloth. So there are a lot of problems with him. I think they'll still cover the University of Georgia, but in 2 of the cases in that article where they said that these kids went on and played, they didn't. And not only that, those 2 people were never charged with anything. There were allegations made. They weren't charged, but they were still removed from the team. So he didn't write it that way. And look, I think they'll still report on the University of Georgia because it's a big story, but he should have been fired.
Alicia, and then Phil.
I think most important here, number one, is that we need to know the facts. This is a public institution. If there are alleged sexual assault cases, if kids are breaking the law, we need to know it. And so I hope that they'll continue to investigate. What I also appreciate is the editor of the AJC taking responsibility and talking about how important it is for the media to be held accountable.
You don't always see that.
Well,
No.
the editor
Phil?
really didn't take responsibility. In fact, an editor ought to be reprimanded too. And where's the fact checking? And so I also would argue that all of Judd's stories over the years now should be looked at for possible misinformation, lies, falsification.
All right, let's move on. In a 4-2 vote, the Fulton County Commission will move forward with a $200,000 study to consider whether to grant reparations for Black residents. Now, supporters say this task force will determine if reparations are warranted and if they are, in what form. Alicia, we'll start with you on this. Just your thoughts. It's a study.
It's a study. And I think many would argue, there are lots of things that Fulton County should be doing with its money, including focusing on a new jail and probably a new hospital. Clearly, this was something that was important for the commissioners, and I'll just say, as a Black woman, my ancestors were enslaved people, and the vestiges of slavery have gone on for centuries. And so it is important that it is studied. It's important to acknowledge that whether it's education or other institutions in this country, that Black people have been negatively impacted. Again, whether or not this was the right time, the right amount of money, if taxpayers should be paying for this is another question, but I think the topic itself is important to a lot of people.
Martha.
I mean, it's a study, right? And I think to your point, they need a new jail. They need a new hospital. That's for people today, right now. But if you would look, I saw a statistic recently, and this is not justifying any of the bad things that have happened, but if African Americans were their own country, they would be the 12th largest GDP in the world. You have to look at what has been accomplished and what's been done, and it's not just about paying money to make things better. There have been a lot of things that have made things better. But I will acknowledge, and my friends and I talk about this all the time, I think as a white person, I probably think things are better than they are. As a Black person, you might think things are worse than they are, and somewhere in the middle is the truth, and that's where we can find the truth. So I think it's a waste of money for Fulton County, but if they feel like they need to do it and they've got the votes, I support the democratic process.
Melita.
Well, I think there's broad agreement between what both of our colleagues have said, and I think it'll be interesting to see the results of the study and what the Fulton County Commission decides to do once they have those results.
Phil, final word.
Well, it's a waste of money, $210,000 for a study. And Commissioner Bridget Thorne made a very good point that so far they've only, this is the second time they're doing this, so far they've only studied the impact on African Americans, ancestors of slaves, right up until 1980. And Thorne and some other commissioners argued, wait a minute now, we've had all these programs, probably billions of dollars in Fulton County and Georgia to help the low income and the disadvantaged. So there is help going to try to right the wrongs of 50, 60, 70 years ago and going back to the Civil War. But you're never going to be able to figure out who's going to get this free money. That's the problem.
Well, that's why there's a study, right?
Yes.
Alicia?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the last word on this. It is disrespectful and a dishonor to enslaved hundreds of thousands of Africans who were brought here against their will to say, we're giving help to the low income. We're not talking about low income people. We're talking about hundreds of years of slavery where people were judged by the condition of their teeth, the size of their breasts, that they were mutilated and beaten, and hundreds of years of not having access to education and healthcare and all of these things. There's a study that just happened in Atlanta that talks about it would take 100 years for Black students in Atlanta public schools to catch up to white students today. Part of that
is... So are whites to blame for all of this?
It's not about blaming white people, Phil. It's about understanding the history and making the wrongs right at the best ways we can. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Some reparations,
there's better ways
perhaps,
to make those wrongs
land
right.
was stolen from Black people.
Finish.
There's a lot that needs to be done, and that's why these studies are very important.
And I'm going to leave it there because we'll have a lot of discussion in the future on this issue. Coming up, winners and losers, stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Big winners today. Congratulations to our own Theron Johnson and his wife China and their oldest boy Tyson. They all welcomed a new baby boy this week. Little Tatum was born Wednesday morning, weighing in at 8 pounds, 12 ounces. Big, cute little baby. Auntie Lori can't wait to meet him. Martha.
Yeah, so my winner this week is Nick Ayers, who ironically started a diaper company called Every Life Diaper, and he is also one of the founders of Public Square that just went public, and these are companies that give money to conservative causes, and so it's he's my winner this week. And also, the folks at the Ritz-Carlton, I was in for a couple of meetings in Atlanta and I had to stay overnight, and the whole staff, when I walked through, go, "You were on the Georgia Gang." So I want to say, I can't remember all of your names. It was so many people. Thank you so much.
Alicia.
You're famous, Martha.
I don't know. We all are.
At the Ritz, you know
Yes,
that.
That's right.
My loser this week, I'm going to start with the State Board of Education of Florida for requiring teachers to include in the state standards that slavery was somehow personally beneficial to enslaved people. Disgusting and unacceptable. My winners for the week, of course, Theron and China, congratulations. But teachers, they are returning to school this coming week before the students return. So congrats to you. Hope you had a wonderful summer and that you rested and you're ready for our babies to come back, because we are ready to send them.
Yes, we are. Phil.
Well, CNBC made Georgia one of the top states when it comes to infrastructure, and of course that ties right in that we're the best state, number one, in which to do business. So congratulations, of course, to the Republican-led legislature for allocating the proper money, and of course for Governor Kemp and Commissioner Russell McMurray. I don't know his politics, but he's one of the best transportation commissioners in the country. Yeah, the losers, this reparations study. Come on, we could do a study for probably $20 and tell them what they need to do, right, Alicia? But anyhow. Oh yeah, Alan Judd. He is a loser.
Melita.
My winner is the Biden-Harris campaign staffers who utilized footage from our Northwest Georgia Republican Congresswoman in an ad for the Biden administration, which has now logged more than 49 million views. My loser is Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones for doubling down on his support for the country music star Jason Aldean's "Try That in a Small Town" video, filmed in front of the Maury County, Tennessee courthouse. It's a dog whistle for racial violence, and it really should have not happened.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.